All right. Why don't we go ahead and jump right in? We have a lot to cover today. So, hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Consolidating to Scale, Modernizing Your Quote to Cash Engine, Rethinking Your Monetization Stack for 2025. We're really excited that you're joining us. We know your time is valuable, so we've really packed today's session with practical insights for finance, operation, revenue, and product leaders, really looking to streamline their monetization processes and scale smarter for 2025. Before we jump in, a few quick housekeeping notes. The webinar is being recorded. We'll send the recording and slides to all the registrants after the session. Feel free to submit your questions at any time using the Q&A panel. We'll have time for live Q&A at the end, but if we don't get to your question, we'll follow up with you directly after the session. So with that, let's get started. Okay, for those of you who may not know us, let me introduce today's speakers. Youssef Yaghmour is the CEO of BluLogix, and he's a recognized leader in enterprise monetization. He's worked with the companies across the SaaS, AI, IoT, managed services, UCaaS space to tackle complex revenue operations challenges. And he brings a really unique, real-world perspective on why consolidation isn't just a finance project, it's a business growth imperative. And I'm Inga Broman, I'm VP of Marketing here at BluLogix. I work closely with our clients and partners to help them navigate the shifting landscapes of the quote to cash and usage-based billing and revenue management. Today, we are going to be sharing not just why consolidation matters, but how to actually make it happen. Okay, so today we're going to cover a lot of ground. I wasn't kidding when I said that we had a packed agenda. Really, the big things that we're going to cover today are what's changing in 2025, really just the market pressures, making monetization really a boardroom topic. A little bit about how CFOs are taking the lead with that, why finance is driving these operational changes, but how everybody in the mix is going to have a voice in this. Third really is this why we say best of breed, but it's more point solutions aren't really working anymore, and why having multiple solutions are slowing your business down. Why consolidation matters. Really, you understand this probably better than anyone else, but beyond cost cutting, why it's a growth enabler. A little bit about stack sprawl. We call it stack sprawl, a hidden threat, the risk of these fragmented systems, and what they're doing to your revenue and to your compliance. Platformization, and that word will get that red line underneath it every time you use it in Microsoft, because platformization isn't a word except for it is for us. Our really what we'd like to cover is sort of why it wins and how a unified approach supports agility and scale, which are really things that are going to be important when we talk about 2025. And then lastly, really we'll go into, what to look for in a monetization platform, and are you ready to consolidate? Super quick, five questions, and understand sort of where you are in that journey. And of course, wrap it up with the live Q&A at the end. So let's go ahead and dive into what's happening in 2025 and why this conversation is so critical right now. I probably don't need to say it. Everyone essentially has probably, their own certain things that they're facing in the business front right now. But I think, we see a lot of things on 2025. We know we have a lot of people from SaaS companies, a lot of people from UCaaS companies on this webinar today. So some of the things aren't really as critical, tariffs and trade wars or economic uncertainty and recession risk, although those are very big issues for people right now. I think things that like AI and digital transformation, as well as talent shortage, risk management, taxation complexity, and really the idea of cash flow. And then lastly, it's this concept of how costs are rising, particularly when we go through your monetization stack. What you're going to see and what we've heard and seen in the market space is that the cost of the individual tools are going up pretty significantly, which is increasing the total cost to sort of service your monetization. So really what we're seeing right now is happening is CFOs and business leaders, particularly sort of at the C-suite level, are looking at really 5 different things that they need to do. The first is really optimizing the business model. And when we say that, we're really, talking about aligning your pricing and packaging to market dynamics. Same thing with go-to-market flexibility, this idea of faster launches, more agile channel strategies, profit optimization, which is such a critical thing all times, but in 2025, probably even more, really understanding how precision in billing and your revenue recognition and your margin analysis are going to drive your success, not just this year, but going forward and set you up. The fourth really is resource management. There's a talent shortage in some of the key areas that are needed for billing. And really the goal is, how do you automate those low value tasks to free up those strategic resources so they can pursue some of the more technical or high value concepts that you need people to work in. And then lastly, this has always been something important, but I think again, 2025 just puts it on a whole different footing, which is the ability to pivot quickly. How can you adapt to those market shifts without bottlenecks, both in IT and in your process? So why executives are scrutinizing every tool in your monetization stack? It's, they're not just watching the cost, they're actually auditing the operational efficiency as well. It's what we hear every day. Obviously, you hear about cost, we talk about rising cost, but you also hear, the cost, the total cost of ownership for your monetization stack, which is going to include your cost of integration, your stack complexity, blocking scale, which is not just a cost perspective, it's obviously a revenue perspective as well. The risk and audit readiness is becoming more and more urgent. Again, that's a 2025 thing, but it's always been there. It's just more critical right now. And then too many tools doing similar things, but being very poorly integrated. I love Jason Lumpkin from SaaStr. And this was a quote that jumped out at me and made me really talk about this topic, which is, yes, we're coming back, but every CFO is doing a vendor audit right now. And what they're still hoping to do is consolidate those vendors. So what we want to do is really talk about a different way to do it, that gives you more functionality and gives you a better path into the market, to protect your revenue as well as your profitability. So there are 5 real things that we're seeing right now, that are really critical as you move into 2025, as the sort of economic pressures, are fluctuating back and forth, and the business models are evolving. The monetization stack is just becoming a bigger inflection point, not just for finance teams. What we're seeing right now is more and more teams across the whole organization are invested in this, and they understand that they need to fix some of these problems in order to set themselves up for success. The first real area is in pricing. You got to have pricing flexibility and packaging flexibility. It's just not optional anymore. When we see the different pricing models that are being adopted with a lot of success, when we're talking usage-based pricing, we're talking hybrid, we're talking event-driven pricing, there's a number of different things that you need to do to be able to get to where you can dynamically price your products to make sure that you're capturing the market and you're not getting hit by some of these headwinds of 2025. The second real area is channel. Channel is just so critical when you're wanting to grow your business. It really, a partner network is going to give you a number of different things. The first is, the ability to be able to indirectly sell to the market without adding costly headcount. But it's also just a different voice that's selling to that market. So oftentimes it's going to be somebody who has a bigger voice in that market than you may have in a particular area, or the ability to touch people. So you need to really be able to onboard your partners. You need to be able to configure them correctly. You need to be able to manage complex entitlements and pricing at that partner level, automate your commissions calculations, and then really white label and customize billing at scale. Without these capabilities, you're just going to be in a manual process, which, based on what we see in the marketplace right now, is a huge operational risk. The channel agility is going to be essential for growth this year. The third is really this idea of resource optimization. And it's just it's super easy. Stop allocating strategic resources to manual work. And the biggest thing that we see with this is data and manual tasks associated with that, invoice creation, reconciliation, partner invoices, and just ad hoc reporting. It's not just inefficient, it's also demoralizing and expensive. If you have really good strategic resources, the last thing in the world you want to do is put them in a position where, they're not enjoying what they're doing. Your profitability and margin analysis. your profitability has to go deeper than top line revenue. You really need to be able to dig into product or SKU or partner or channel or region or usage pattern or customer segment, just because without that, you're not going to have a really good understanding of, hey, this customer is costing us too much money, or this product isn't generating what we thought it was going to. And really the last is the idea of cost containment for your platform components. If you've got 7 to 10 platform components and they're each sort of growing at, what we're seeing right now is, it can be upwards of 8 to 10% annually. You've got to be able to figure that out. So you've got to be able to identify your overlapping system, these custom middleware to glue things together, and then these expensive consulting hours for really basic integration tasks. And then lastly is really this idea of technical debt. What's your technical debt and how can you, I'd say avoid that, but get around it in many respects. So it just goes back to the idea that cost cutting, or consolidation is a strategic play, not a cost cut. You really have to be able to control and scale. And it's not, going to give you a patchwork of different solutions isn't going to get you there. You really need to look at how you unify things to get rid of things to automate and to integrate and to touch all of the different areas that you need to touch in order to give yourself an effective monetization strategy. So we really think of it this way. Your fragmented stacks are creating chaos and fragility, which is really critical when you're scaling, while your unified platforms really give you the automation, the visibility, and the speed. So somebody said this year, and I had to grab this, even though I can't actually directly quote it, but companies that scale this year may not be the most innovative, but they're going to be the most operationally aligned. You need to be able to unify your entire platform, whether that's from CPQ and quoting, billing and invoicing, really critical usage metering and rating, but not a standalone module for that, actually something that's embedded, as well as partner operations, tax automation, and revenue recognition and compliance. So CFOs are driving change, but everyone has a stake or a voice in this. They're sort of seeing it at the macro level, though, and understanding they don't want to live with a patchwork. They want to be able to control. They need real-time data. They want fewer vendors, and they want audit readiness. The concept is to go from, they've really moved from that growth at all costs to efficient scale, and their stack consolidation is now becoming a strategic mandate. So what are our goals today? We really want to understand the operational cost and risk of managing 6 to 7 or 10 disconnected monetization tools, as well as learning how fragmented stacks create inefficiencies, manual workarounds, data silos, as well as why CFOs are prioritizing this, and then how everyone who is a stakeholder in the monetization process can participate, as well as then creating that blueprint for transitioning to platform-based approach to monetization. So on that note, I'm going to turn this over to Youssef and really have a conversation about this. Youssef, like I said, is one of the key voices in enterprise scale monetization and really understands at a detailed level how this complexity can be built to something that becomes your competitive advantage as opposed to something that holds you back and allows you and ensures that you're not scaling. So turning it over to you, Youssef. Tell me what we're seeing right now, or what you're seeing right now when you're talking to customers and prospects and partners about the idea of stack sprawl, and really how that is creating bottlenecks in monetization.
Well, first of all, hello everybody. Thank you for joining the webinar, and Inga, thank you for the intro. It is, when business is transformed from transactional to digital and to subscription, and then from on-site to hosting and SaaS, most of them kept doing business the same way, and that's not how you scale, and that's not how you become successful basically in the digital space and in the subscription space and in the SaaS space. And this is particularly applicable to people in the SaaS business. So what they end up doing is every time they face a challenge, they will actually go and buy a system to try to solve that challenge. But nobody looks at the picture end to end. And what's a common term in the industry today is this quote to cash process. That's basically what people refer to define this process end to end. They start with the word quote, but basically, Inga, from experience and from looking at the customers where we deployed our platform to, is we actually start by defining the catalog, not by the CPQ. And in many cases, those businesses that are actually creating a quote and sending it to the customer are actually doing most of their business using online e-commerce kind of concept. You probably start a relationship with the customer with the CPQ, but to name some of those modules that people buy in silo and buy individually, this is what we've listed here. You need a CPQ, you need to be able to send quotes to customers, you need some kind of contract management, and contract management will basically introduce a gap in people when they start implementing a CLM, a contract life cycle management. They don't really anticipate what's going to happen when it's time to renew the contract. What is the challenge of actually managing that? So, that you start by thinking contracts, and then by the time some of those contracts are about to expire, what do you do with the renewal, and how do you manage it, and how do you control the churn, and how do you keep the relationship healthy between you and the customer? A lot of times, the renewal isn't about renewing exactly the contract that you have in place. It's actually being innovative and smart on what is the best way to renew this contract. Is it the same service? Do you need a different volume? Do you have to upgrade? Do you have to downgrade? Do you have to change the package? So when you buy these systems in silo, order management is separate from service management, is separate from billing, separate from metering the usages, separate from calculating the taxation, separate from revenue recognition, you have your data all over the place. And obviously, at some point, you need to have these systems talk to each other. And because nobody looked at the picture end to end, you end up either swivel chairing between these systems, manually copying and pasting from different systems, using spreadsheets to try to batch work basically in between, spend a lot of money trying to integrate using APIs, but you haven't really designed this from space to space. So that is a challenge, and we will give you a recommendation at the end how do you overcome these challenges. Next.
Okay, so tell me about point solutions. I think, we've really heard people talk about this a lot, about how the point solutions, used to work for them. And what we're seeing now is that they don't really scale in 2025, but they don't really scale, period. So talk to us a little bit about that, if you could.
So these are some examples of the systems that we've listed basically, and the tools that we've listed in the previous slide. But if we take just these 6, basically, rightly so, you will go and explore getting a CPQ tool, whether you get it part of your CRM or you get an independent one. Sometimes the integration between a CPQ and the CRM is already a native connection, and that's recognized. You do it, you send a code, and you send it to the customer, and the customer accepts it. Now, you have to begin to activate the service, deliver the service, which is the order management or the contract management. So because it's an independent tool, because it's a standalone, how do you sync that data into the order management? And how do you basically, when you activate these orders, how do you tell the billing system and tell the metering system that you've got the data ready and the order has been delivered, so that you can actually begin to calculate the charges and generate the invoice to the customer at the right time? And if the integration, if the synchronization isn't there, then you're either copying files back and forth, or you're manually, moving the data from one system to the other. And in many cases, and we've actually seen that, data is actually re-entered manually into the other system. And you can imagine the gaps between the data, the human errors in between, and now you have part of the data in the system, another part of the data in that. And if you're actually tracking, and if you want to deliver a successful customer experience, and this data is all over the place and in so many systems, you can imagine the challenge that you will be facing. Same thing when you get to the billing. Take a small example, which is one of the biggest sources of revenue gaps. You get a quote, you fulfill that order basically that you received from the customer, or you activate that service. And you forget to tell the billing system that this service has been added, it is active, and now you have to start billing it. There were so many times where we actually got into an implementation with customers where we discovered certain items, confirmed orders, have been activated and have not been billed to the customer for X number of months sometimes. And it is always a backlog when it comes to that. I still remember a gap that we've just closed for one of our customers, a new order basically with one of their big clients, and there was about $2 million of unbilled usages and orders sitting there simply because they could not connect between the order
Right.
and the billing information. So all these engines are necessary and are needed, but because they're running in silo and they're running as independent tools, you keep getting these challenges. Let me take another example. Going from billing to revenue recognition, you've generated the invoice, you've sent the customer an invoice for an annual subscription in advance, and you've collected the money. Now your ERP wants to calculate what is the recognized revenue for that period. And there again, even if you were able to copy some of the billing data and put it in the RevRec system, you still have to go to the RevRec system and define how to recognize that order and how to recognize the revenue basically from this invoice. Although when you actually look at the life cycle of the relationship with the customer, that basically started from the catalog, and we keep talking about that catalog because in that catalog, you should have defined that actually this product that I'm selling to this type of customers, I am billing annually in advance. If I have this information in the catalog, why should I redefine it again in the revenue recognition? The answer is I have to define it again because the two systems are not connected. Okay, so these are examples of some of the serious disconnects that you get when you buy these tools and these systems in silo. And the answer you can anticipate. The answer is to try to buy less systems and see if you can actually consolidate as many of those systems as you can into one. I think you can anticipate that this is where we're heading. Next slide.
So that's exactly the point is, so talk to about what consolidation really means, because a lot of people have made big investments in their systems. Is this a rip and replace scenario, or, talk a little bit about that if you could.
What we've listed here basically is this is what you see in terms of a process in the quote to cash. You start with the catalog, and now remember, you can see that now we've actually added the catalog before the quote, because without a successful catalog management capability, you probably do not have the tools to quote the customer correctly and to configure what you need to configure. So the process really starts with defining a good catalog. Then you go to quoting the customer, to effecting an order or a contract, to activating and delivering the service. And then you go all the way until you generate the invoice, collect the money, which is essentially the cash. But you still have to do some actions after collecting the cash. The process is usually referred to as quote to cash, and these are basically the challenges. You should be looking at how do I unify all these systems? Can I put them in one or two? Everybody knows that you have to have a CRM that cannot be replaced. You have to have an ERP that cannot be replaced. But can I put most of the functionality in between that actually connects the two end to end for an automated process? Can I use or put all of that in one system, maybe two at the most, and carefully choose them so that they can talk to each other? I don't have a data challenge. I have one source of truth in the data and in what I have. These are the points that you want to take into account. And then the next slide, you will see that we don't really define it as quote to cash per se.
Right.
We really define it as catalog to provisioning. We basically divide that into two sub processes. The first one is the catalog to provisioning. We left it as quote because this is the common term in the industry, but the reality is it is from catalog to provisioning. That's one part of the entire process, and it's the first sub process. Define what you sell correctly, price it correctly, and have the flexibility and the power to define any kind of pricing that you need, from simple pricing to dynamic pricing as your market demands, as your product basically needs to be delivered and sold. What are the relationship between products? So essentially define what you sell, define how you price it, define how you sell it, and then define how you charge it. You can put all that intelligence basically in the catalog, then move to the quoting and configuration tool. If you can actually put both items in one tool, in one system, that's perfect. And while you're looking at that, you might as well want to consider, can I not put my online commerce and online e-commerce as part of that? Why don't I let the customer buy from me directly using some kind of an e-commerce tool with my enterprise charge, with my customer portal that I have deployed for that customer, and then have that quote, which is accepted by the customer as an order, automatically translate into a contract, which, by the way, should be connected to renewal management at the end, because we just talked about the essential and critical relationship between the two. So convert that to a contract and an order, and let the activation and provisioning, service provisioning, fulfillment, and whatever logistics that you need around that, let that be handled automatically by that system. If it cannot be through API integration, if it cannot automatically activate the service through a different platform or through interoperability between the two platforms, and you really need to think carefully when you're choosing the right tool that it has the capability to actually do that for you, or at least create some kind of a streamlined process for that service activation and provisioning, so that you track what you do. And when you actually do it correctly and it's time to bill the customer, and that takes us to the next sub process, that automatically, on the next slide, please, Inga, and that automatically takes you to, now I'm going to start charging the customer. This is why advanced billing tools, monetization systems, will actually separate between the billing process and the charging process. You could be accumulating charges for the customer from the point you deliver the service. You could be tracking changes in the quantity of that service or the consumption. And as you do that, you need to charge as you are loading the data related to consumption or to quantities or to activation and deactivation of the service. So basically, now that is the sub process. It starts with the charging, and it does end when you actually, after you have collected the cash, when you actually have analyzed and looked at a comprehensive dashboard. This is how my financial situation looks like. That's how much money I made on every product that I sold to every customer, because this is how I make intelligent decisions about pricing, intelligent decisions about renewal of contracts, about maintaining that customer satisfaction all the way. If I have a connected process between charging and that analysis, then I have a comprehensive tool. And so that takes me from basically just charging, collecting usages, and tracking customers' consumption throughout the billing period, to the process of generating the billing. And by the way, think of some intelligence in the billing. When you've got some complex requirements, when you are in SaaS, when you are in IoT, when you are in even UCaaS, sometimes you've got challenges with one particular customer, specific order, something got delayed. So you want to take that specific customer out of the billing process, but you don't want to hold billing for the rest of the customers. So does my billing capability that I have in the tool actually allow me to do that? Take one customer out and then run the billing for everybody else, and then bring that customer back and pick up the charges from where I left the invoice last. I don't have to remember that in a spreadsheet. I want the system to track all of this for me. So do I have the right capabilities in my billing tool, even if you want to refer to as end of period, cycle billing, subscription billing, usages billing? It's basically a cycle that repeats itself on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, annual basis, which means that your system should allow you to bill monthly or quarterly or annually, not only calculate the charges on that basis, but also be able to bill customers on that basis. Some customers might expect to be billed once a quarter. They don't want to get a monthly invoice. So I'm citing these as examples for the advanced tools that you need to have if you really want to scale the business and deal with different market and customer demands. Then, of course, give the customer the capability to manage their accounts online, to know exactly what they've purchased from you, what is active and what is not, and sometimes even capture the details of who is using what service in that order. So can I create a hierarchy within my customer stack so that I know the user for every SaaS license that this customer has purchased from me? Where is it? What location is that active? When was it activated? Can I capture additional service details related to that? Now you're beginning to see that not only do you need the financial information to bill, but you also need the service details, and it should be connected to what you have sold the customer and what the order is and what the right hierarchy structure and actually service data that you have to capture. You do all of that. Go ahead.
No, we have a question. Because I think it's as you go through this process, is BluLogix relevant for a self-service motion? And I just wanted to jump in with that. I just wanted to answer that question right now because it seems so relevant for what we're talking about right here.
It is, and we've seen it a lot of times. I can easily, off the top of my head, tell you that at least 30% of our customers actually have that enabled, because we do have an e-commerce engine as part of that. But what is really important here is that sometimes you have an enterprise portal that does other services for your end customers, basically. So can you actually take that customer portal that you have in the billing system and make it part of my overall enterprise portal experience that our customers are using on a daily basis, and I don't have to jump between systems? So that's another point to look at when you're actually choosing the right tool. And the answer, if you're asking about BluLogix, yes, we allow that. We actually give multiple methods for embedding that customer portal, basically screens and functionality into an existing enterprise portal. But it's an integral part of the automated process where you have to hire less people to manage all of that. In many cases, and as an example on that, basically in the IoT space, when customers are actually buying devices, subscribing to a service, your users as an IoT provider does not even know when the customer turned on the device to be used so that you can begin the charge. You want that to be captured automatically. You want, on the first use of the device, you want this process of activating the device and kicking in the billing process to start automatically. And you don't have to wait for spreadsheets to be downloaded so that you can go and manually activate these services when customers have used it. Just think of all these challenges as a need to have in the end-to-end automated process. When charges are calculated, invoices are ready, you have to calculate the right tax with all the complexity. The complexity with calculating the tax isn't just about integrating what you have with a tax engine, a certified tax engine. Most of the people on this call would actually know who the popular tax engines are, so I'm not going to use a specific name for that. But just think that that tax engine expects you to know and track the location of the service, expects you to track the actual quantity and the volume and the amount and the data needed so that you can be smart about calculating the tax and handling exemptions, everything you really need to have accurate taxes based on the right compliance is actually needed in that billing. It has to be captured so that you can send the correct data to the tax engine. Then begins the process when the invoice is generated and when you've actually sent it, the process of financial management starts there. You need to track these financial transactions against a GL code that comes from the ERP. A lot of times we see people skip that, but that's actually very a critical data point to have to simplify the integration with the ERP system so that your finance team, you started this presentation by saying CFO is taking the lead, which is a fact. Because at the end, everything you're doing has to feed into that cash, that revenue management, which basically the CFO owns. So if you can simplify the life of integration by tracking GL transactions along with your invoice and payment and adjustment, that will be perfect, and it will make the integration process with the ERP a lot easier. And if you can push that data so that your revenue recognition engine that you use can automatically read that this is actually an annual contract paid in advance, and it is to be amortized over 12 months period, and the service is actually rendered or delivered, considered to be delivered at the end of the month or at the beginning of the month, whatever those rules are. If you can actually send this information to the revenue recognition engine along with the charges and along with the GL code, that's perfect, because you are in compliant and you need less configuration work on the RevRec engine to work efficiently. Then your payment collections. A lot of times people don't, or because the capability doesn't exist, they forget that an essential and a very important part of the payment collection is actually the dunning. What happens if a credit card that you have an account that is expired? What are you doing to proactively reach out to the customer and get an updated credit card or expiry date or whatever that may be? Or are you going to take certain actions if a customer is late on the payment? And sometimes the dunning could be as simple as sending an email notification or triggering a CRM, event to call the customer for collecting that money. So dunning is an integral part in a completed and a comprehensive system is an integral part of payment management because it should be connected also to your provisioning, and it should be integrated with that, along with aging management, of course, accounts receivable management. If you have to export this data into some kind of cash management or accounts receivable management systems, and now they're growing actually rapidly in the industry, then the data needed for something like this to work should be available in the system. And now at the end of this second sub process is, can I analyze my finance so that I know how much money I made, in which track, which industry, which product, what time of the year, etc. A question, Inga, for you.
Yeah. So before we jump off of collections and payments, we had a question about what are the payment gateway capabilities? I think you answered that, but if there's anything that you're thinking of that you didn't mention.
Of course, to begin with, there are multiple payments. Most of the popular payment gateways in the market basically are supported by, if you're talking about our platform, they are supported by our platform. But things that you want to consider is that you support credit cards, that you actually support ACH, that you support automatic payment, basically for that you support. A lot of customers would like to charge some kind of usage fee for processing the payment. So if you process by credit card, so that you can actually apply that charge, which comes on top of the invoice. These are the typical basically payment management capabilities that you need to have in a payment collection. Anything else?
No, I think we're good.
Okay, next slide.
All right. So that really talks, I think you talked a lot about the concept of the platform versus the patchwork, but I think it talked to us a little bit about, what does the modern stack look like? We understand what the quote to cash stack looks like, but what's the modern technical stack look like?
Well, let's talk about the must-have ones, because you could, depending on the individual requirements based on the industry, some of these things may change, but you cannot have a good automated system, end-to-end process that's really automated most of the time without having a very powerful catalog, which can allow you to capture everything I said about defining the product, how you sell it, the service details of it, how do you activate it, and being able to really manage this catalog to provisioning and then charging to recognition, if you like, in that space. So catalog is an essential part, and it needs to be available and connected with contract management, with CPQ, and with order management. Ideally, you would like all these essential modules or capabilities connected to each other. If not in one system, but at least they are fully integrated so that you don't have to manually swivel chair and move data manually between one to the other. So from catalog to actually contract, order management and activation, then the activation of the service, managing the renewals, minimizing the churn to the minimum, being able to serve your customers better and track your revenue. And by the way, if you have a good renewal tool in the system, you should be able to do revenue forecasting and invoice projection. You should be able from that. If you really have a good renewal tool, then you should be able to calculate or predict what the invoice forecasting should look like in my next year, my next 3 years, my next 5 years, reading data from contracts that are going to expire or likely to be automatically renewed. So if you've got a contract that is 2 years with auto renewal and you're calculating the revenue for the next 4 years, you will include that contract for revenue after 2 years because the flag for auto renewal in there. So if you have a smart renewal management tool, you can easily create revenue projection and invoice forecasting basically with that. Typically, when you have usages, and in most advanced systems today, usages is an integral part, being able to meter usages. And by the way, usage isn't only what you consume. change in quantity is also part of usages, because sometimes you've got a software that is activated for 10 licenses or 10 seats today, 20 seats tomorrow, and then maybe down to 15. If you're only reading the usages at the end of that, you have missed these challenges, and you've basically missed on revenue if you don't track that. So it's a misconception that you just load it once. No, you actually need active loading of consumption and usages. So that's how you differentiate between a powerful usage rating system and a simple one. Sometimes you need mediation to be able to take data back and forth between different systems. We've already talked about revenue forecasting and revenue recognition and that concept of margin analyzer. And by the way, you cannot really calculate the real margin of a product that you sell to a customer if your system does not allow you to capture the cost, just like it does capture the selling price. And you need to connect the two together. And that's an essential piece of information if you are to calculate the margins accurately. Most MSPs, most providers, most SaaS providers today will actually have some form of a channel, resellers, agent, managed billing, white label. So if you do have that, then you need partner management capability and channel management capability. The more, the better. The more advanced, the better. In some cases, if you're doing managed billing, you're doing the service, but you want your reseller to be able to manage billing for their own customers. One of the capabilities, that advanced systems like BluLogix will talk about is, but I want dual billing. I want to be able to bill my reseller for the service at the price between me and the reseller and the end customer invoice. So you're generating more than one invoice for the same event, and you want to maintain financial integrity. So that's some of the points you want to consider. We talked about that. You cannot do business today without being able to handle tax calculation intelligently, which basically takes you to what we started with, from CRM to ERP. Try to create an automated process as much as you can. Next.
So quick question though, on this. So about pricing. So catalog is managing pricing. So talk a little bit about pricing if you could, because it's one of the hottest topics right now, is that how do you manage pricing and bundling and packages in order to optimize your revenue as well as your profitability?
It's actually a very good question. We've seen different systems and we've seen implementations, with tools that are out there in the market when we migrated customers and when we've done integration and what have you. A lot of times, because the catalog doesn't have the capability to manage pricing smartly and intelligently, what happens is, if you have a product that you're selling on a monthly basis, you create a line item in your catalog. And if you sell it twice, if you sell it on an annual basis, you create another line item. And if you sell it for a different price for another customer, then you create a third one. We've seen catalogs that actually include thousands of items, when in reality, all they are selling is about 90 or 100 items. They just have really just 90, 100 items max. But because of all these variations, they have to create thousands of entries in the catalog. That's a poor way of managing pricing. So what you need is a catalog that allows you to manage the product that you sell and the services that you provide as one single list, and then define these prices based on sectors and based on the frequency and based on the charging rule in what you call price books or rate plans or something like this. Okay. And powerful systems would, even if you have created a special pricing container for one specific customer that goes with the contract, so that you remember the price that you sold to that specific customer for every contract in the future and every order in the future, you can actually go down to creating a customer price container. You can call it whatever you want. I mean, we call it, in our system, we call it a customer rate plan. But it's a pricing container basically for how you calculate the price and what it is for a group of customer or a particular customer. That's the way to manage pricing. Obviously, on top of that, you want to be able to bundle, you want to be able to give discounts, you want to be able to calculate dynamic pricing if a customer buys from me, or if a customer reaches basically a certain volume, I want to automatically adjust the price to that. These are examples of dynamic pricing, and it should not be, like I said, keep creating and adding variations in the catalog.
So I think what you've been getting to is the idea of this end-to-end integration and automation.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
That's typically, basically, what it is. Every time I look at this slide, I think maybe that catalog in the middle should be actually a much bigger box, because everything is driven, in the automation
Well,
from the catalog. These
yeah,
are
and
typical modules that you need to have in a
right.
good and powerful, basically, billing system. And this is what a typical process. The objective is to automate between CRM on one side and an ERP on the other side. And these are
Well,
the
and
typical modules. We've talked about most of them.
I was going to say, and that sort of gets to the next thing, which is the idea that, people have made those bigger investments in already in pieces of that puzzle already. The integrate or replace question.
Well, I think the answer is right there. You cannot do without CRM and ERP. That's just it's a de facto in the industry. But you want to be able to automatically integrate with that so that you don't have to swivel chair when you do that. So you're keeping the CRM, and naturally you must have the ERP, and in between you can't do without a tax engine. Every invoice that goes to an end customer has to have a tax, unless you have a tax exempt. You definitely, in today's world of subscription and digital services, you need a revenue recognition engine, but you would like to have it integrated with the billing system so that you don't have to re-enter data or redefine how you recognize revenue. Same thing goes for the tax engine. You need it to be integrated. You don't want to download files offline and send them to the tax engine offline and bring it back and then load it, and go through a manual process of generating the invoice. It is preferred to have an integrated service delivery. It's actually highly recommended. It's not a preferred. It's I think even highly recommended is probably an understatement, because this is where most of the revenue gaps are, and this is where most of the manual work
Right.
exists today.
Okay. So when we talk about the point solutions versus the end-to-end platform, I think what you've been saying essentially is, it's this idea of manual or siloed versus essentially integrated and automated at the end of the day.
Exactly, and I think you can speak to that, Inga, and allow me have a sip of water, please.
Okay. I don't know. Essentially at the end of the day, we're talking here about the BluLogix end-to-end platform, but any really robust end-to-end platform is going to give you, instead of having the separate and redo work like your CPQ, it's going to be a native CPQ that's connected directly, or your usage billing, which I think is a hugely important one right now, because more and more companies are going to usage-based billing. And what they're seeing is that they have like a usage platform, and then they have everything else wrapped around that. They might have a billing platform that's separate, and they have a CPQ platform that's separate, contract management, RevRec, all of the things that sort of would go together in one, being separated because they have this usage billing and they need to do the metering as well as, I think you've spoken to all of these. The one thing I would say is the partner billing, because of the end tier partner enablement with automation, meaning that you can have multiple layers of partners as opposed to having to do all of those manually. And then again, it's this issue of scalability. Ultimately, at the end of the day, you just need to get to scalable if you want to, take advantage of some of the opportunities that are going to be available during 2025, it seems.
That is true. And speaking of that, we might want to mention that we've recently started seeing the concept of headless billing, where the
Yes.
customer already has a provider, already has some sort of an enterprise platform that they are using to serve their channel, their resellers, their customers, and they're
Right.
missing this functionality of billing, or this functionality of metering, or this functionality that we've talked about. So instead of having to switch between different systems and to minimize this back and forth experience, you could simply just use that billing capability as a back office. That basically SDK or API layer that allows you to integrate can create a seamless headless billing, with, of course,
Yep.
e-commerce capabilities.
So ultimately, it's the concept of, platformization wins, right? So fewer integrations, faster go-to-market, simpler compliance, and then scalable. But I want to hop over quickly because I know we're starting to run up on time. Is, the big areas to consider in this. And so I think we call them the big six to consider. But they're really those areas that you've got to consider as you're going through this process.
We talked about the catalog. There is no need to just
Yeah,
repeat that. That's significant. And you would like a tool that really, if not one single tool that takes you from quoting to billing, you want to make sure that what you are using for that is actually interconnected and fully integrated so that you can really scale the business. So that's an area that's tightly connected. You cannot break it into silos of different tools. Then from contract management to the renewal and churn, you really have to have them connected. Most of the revenue lost in the integration or a lot of manual work goes onto, the process of trying to renew existing contracts,
right,
spreadsheets, manual work. So there's always revenue left on the table because of that. Having
right.
that part of the process connected to the process and automated is definitely a business necessity today. We've given you examples on the usages billing and why they are. It is important to actually be able to support the different scenarios of consumption and usages connected, of course, to the tax engine, connected to revenue recognition. It is important to remind you again here that uh, separating charging from billing allows you to actually calculate the charges accurately and not leave revenue on the table or not overcharge your customers by capturing the wrong quantity at a peak or the low quantity, at its lowest value. Channel capability, make it part of the system, make it integral so that you can empower the channel. In most businesses in the US, less than 40% of the business is direct and more than 60 is actually channel. So that is important to have. And we already talked about the end-to-end
Yeah,
integration from CRM
yeah.
to ERP.
So the checklist, are you ready to consolidate? I think, we've talked about a lot of this already, which is the idea that, if you're using spreadsheets for billing or revenue recognition or any of the other components, particularly the catalog, in your process, that's a definite indicator that you need to consolidate. Your pricing changes require IT intervention. I can't tell you how many people have said this to us over the course of the last probably 12 months or so. Your partner billing is living in its own system. Your product and finance team disagree on revenue, and then your usage data is delayed or inaccurate. All of these are really, I think, big red flags of how to, it's time to assess your stack. Because ultimately, you need sales, finance, operation, and revenue all being able to do what they need to do this year in order to really make in order to really sort of overcome some of the headwinds, I think, as we talked about earlier. Anything to add to this, Youssef?
I think that covers basically the key points that we've talked
Okay.
about. Thank you, Inga.
Okay. So lastly, and so that wraps up what we're here to talk about today. I'll give you a really quick overview of BluLogix, because have to. The obligatory commercial at the end. But essentially what BluLogix does is we're complexity simplified. We really work to reduce complexity, to automate processes, to optimize your data, and to allow you to scale. And it really goes in four big areas: people with channel partners, complex usage bundles, or who deal with regulated. Those are areas that if you have those, you really need to talk to, you need an integrated system. BluLogix itself is, essentially a modularized platform that allows you to work on your core billing as well as add additional components that'll help you sort of work your way through the whole integrated and automated package, including sales automation, order management, billing, service management, finance automation, and channel management. And this is the technical one, but essentially saying is that, we're built on one platform and you've got modules that go across it that allow you to expand what you're doing to cover the scenarios that you need to cover. And that is pretty much it. Thank you today for joining us. If there's one key takeaway, I think that hopefully you're getting from this is the idea that monetization really just isn't that back office process anymore. It's a huge strategic growth lever. But in order to leverage it, you really need to build systems that scale with your business, not against it. It's all around the idea of moving with agility, reducing your operational drag, and aligning your monetization stack with your business goals. And I think companies that do that are really going to be the most successful in this year. If you'd like to learn more, feel free to reach out, schedule, we can talk to you about your monetization stack. I'm also going to be sending out the slides from this, as well as the, we have a white paper that goes along with this, that has some of those checklists, and those different tools in there as well. But like I said, feel free to reach out to us if you'd like to see more. Anything you want to add to that, Youssef?
That's it. Thank you for participating. Appreciate your presence and interest.
All right. Awesome. Thank you so much. And we look forward to seeing you at our next one.
Take care.
All right. Thank you.